So this is kind of like a little different for me. This is my first time speaking at a panel, and I'm just gonna I'm gonna go over some slides as I'm talking, and raise some questions that focus on what are some aesthetic representations of racializing and gender policing and police brutality, and so how can we look at these specifically and through the cultural production of Kendrick Lamar? And in this paper, I just want to say that I may use Black, African American interchangeably, but I'm speaking specifically like to the context of historic context in mind, because there are people who don't identify as African American but identify as Black, and so I just want to examine some of the body politics behind this performance and cultural production. Lamar's most recent work focuses on themes of police brutality and existential suffering through an affect of social despair, which I argue are related to an environment that structurally and socially devalues the African American community, with particular attention to how lyrical content and performance style reflect a masculinist discourse on issues of gang violence and police brutality. I'm also interested in how those lyrics have been embraced by young activists and movements against police brutality and mass incarceration. And I argue that Lamar is also responding to the racist social political discourse that frames African American male bodies as criminals or gangbangers who disrupt the normative colonial masculinity that's defined through white heteropatriarchy. And I argue that his work offers a valuable perspective of the effects of anti-Black violence, which is not surprising considering how the Black Lives Matter movement has spread across the country and police violence continues to be on the rise. His work engages in the dialogue in a manner that is sometimes limited but also intimate and insightful. Although Lamar doesn't offer a particularly progressive gender politics through his lyrics, for example, and sort of represents a notable gap in feminist politics within hip-hop, I still argue that there is a valuable commentary of internalized patriarchy, white supremacist ideology, and a sort of body politics that affects memories which he's from Compton, California. So this is one of the first scenes in the All Right video. We have an example of how African American Black masculinity is constructed in contrast to white masculinity, and it's through the framing and presence of Black and white bodies. Throughout the video, we see the presence of a few different white policemen framed in contrast to Black and Latino male bodies, which is earlier to the scene. And there's something interesting in the contrast between Black and white masculine bodies, in which the white male subject they're all police officers, and they're all inexpressive, which would suggest the stoicness or unemotional authority. And following aligns a theorist such as Miles White, author from Jim Crow to Jay-Z, race, rap, and performance of masculinity, would argue that these bodies are text, and that within hip-hop culture, the body serves as a repository transmitter of textual knowledge. And sort of using the bodies of these Black and white characters, the video thematizes how these racialized masculinities are in a sort of structural dialectical relationship, in which white hegemonic masculinity requires an array of subordinated masculinities to maintain its position. Within this hierarchy, Black men are the most marginalized of masculinity. From this marginalized position, the performance of Black masculinity is unable to meet the hegemonic ideal and is bound to fall into what Patricia Hill Collins describes as white normality, Black deviancy framework. And within the world of hip hop, this often leads to what White would also cite as an excessive hypermasculine performance, which White cites as potentially recuperative or oppositional. And whether or not this is the case with Lamar remains to be seen, but also I'm sort of going to just show you some more pictures in which that's sort of illustrated. And White also describes how the socially constructed kinds of gender and racial performance that are historically marked by notions around criminality, deviance, and pathology that are deeply implicated in the construction of African Americanized white masculinity mediated through popular cultural media. Argue that Lamar's character is in all-right position in contrast to the policeman, works within the typical framing of Black masculinity in contrast to structural construction of white masculinity. So I'm gonna just jump. I kind of framed this like really weird. Okay. In the last crucial scene that defines this criminal-police dichotomy, Lamar is shot down from a lamppost, and we watch as the policeman steps out of his car, aims his hand, and pulls his imaginary trigger. At that point, the policeman mounts "pow," and we hear a loud "pow" in the video, with sound of course, with Kendrick falling to the ground in slow motion. His fall is dramatic, and the camera fades to black before we see Lamar's face as he's lying down. His eyes are closed, and he's smiling, and he seems mysteriously content and at peace. And one interpretation would suggest that he has somehow been made into a passive subject, whether unconscious or conscious. And yet at that moment, the policeman is asserting their dominance in the surrealist scene by shooting him. Lamar returns his position, despite, so this is like sort of jumping to the end rather than to the beginning, which like it's sort of in contrast to the uplifting message in the song, and it's sort of like a reminder of like a structural inequality, a structural subordination, in which his elevated position, as you see, like which is a majority of the video, is perceived as a threat to white masculinity and patriarchal institutions of dominance, such as the police. Meanwhile, the bodies of men in the video emit like a wider range of emotions than the white stoic policemen, and the tone in the video is celebratory, and there is a lot of there's a lot of dancing and a lot of there's a range of emotions from anger to joy, and we see the sense of like collective engagement. We see dancers all blocking and breakdancing, and we see several teenagers, adults, and children dancing to music as well. And White offers insight into how constructions of masculinity and blackness mediated through anti-bourgeois dance styles would be as sort of resist control by inviting it, as they transform class and racial grievances into performance art. Rap music videos are spaces that make possible the consumption of spectacularized images of Black masculinity that are simultaneously evasive and evasive. Evasive because the images in these videos resist the control and censure to which Black males are subject, and invasive because they negotiate the distance between themselves and how those who both fear and desire the racial transgression the images present. And Kendrick, however, rather than like dancing, he's sort of dancing in the crowd, but also he's in the position of like surreally flying around. And what is curious is that he's the only person who's flying, and he's living above the crowds and streets, and he's rapping on top of a lamppost, and all the other subjects are pretty much grounded. And this would sort of suggest that it associates him with an elevated status that's sort of associated with weightlessness or freedom. Lamar dropping above, telling the people below the lyrics we're going to be all right, which is hard to not associate his floating body with a, almost quasi-religious figure. He's sort of spreading the message of hope and positivity, empowering to the people below, which are like actually framed below through the camera. His elevated status also suggests a sense of spirituality, which is a recurring theme in his lyrics, and so flying above the crowds, he's sort of moving through that scene. In addition to the surrealist representation of his flying body, the video also frames the police in an unusual way, one in which at the end shoots Kendrick down from a lamppost, not with a gun but with his finger. And this is also a reminder that despite his own elevated social position as someone who may represent himself as a successful mainstream rapper or spiritually elevated, his own body does not escape the structural position as a masculine body rendered as criminal, abject, or socially dead. If the flying is indicative of more psychic and spiritual position, then the white police officer functions as a reactionary figure to subordinated status. And this is representative of what I argue is a more psychic struggle perpetuated by psychic, referring to Fanon, perpetuated by anti-Black structures of power. And the sense of structural violence is also aesthetically and representative present for the gun violence, which creates a sense of like social and economic and political reality in the video, despite all the realist and excessive visuals. Lamar's fate is sealed in the structural relation of death and dominance, which is he sort of plays with as well, because he's also like he like smiles at the camera in a very unusual way. And Michael Jeffries would describe the structural relation and construction of Black masculinity as how the historical legacy of slavery is encoded in our social structures, which were built upon slavery, and in turn these social structures reproduce violence, and in reinforcing the social codes of violence against the Black body. And that's sort of how that discourse articulates itself. And in this sense, Jeffries continues that the imagined Black criminal from the hyper-ghetto prison lives on the margins of legitimate society. His civil rights are frequently denied or violated by police who stop, search, and brutalize without cause, who discriminate based on demeanors or aesthetics that supposedly signal danger. And these are like signs or signals of racialized masculinity, in particular, Jeffries is referring to. And Jeffries is also engaging with conversations around Afro-pessimism, which make the claim that Black people are ontologically in a master slave position. In the case of Lamar's video, Jeffries' analysis would argue that the constructed subjectivity of a hyper-civil Black man exists in a structural relation to a police officer and a criminal police dichotomy. And this sort of just reflects what I said previously, that relationship when he's shot to the ground. Now, Lamar's work demonstrates how his own masculinity is conflicted between the pressures of assuming a dominant position of wealth and power, that sort of like, that sort of consumerist ideology, and also that of identifying with his African American community. Lamar's turn to identify himself as part of a larger community is arguably one of the first steps of sort of his own message that he sort of preaching respect between Black men is not the most transformative or progressive model of masculinity. It is also a search for an alternative model of masculinity, which praises, in his sort of way, is sort of praising revolutionary politics and community, and it's sort of his own first step. And what is missing from Lamar's work is an awareness of how femininity is also part of these problematic relations of racist patriarchal domination, and what is also missing is a reflection of how these relations reproduce the subordination of women and homophobia. Patricia Hill Collins makes a point when discussing the racialized hierarchy of masculinities as important to stress that all women occupy the category of the evolved other that gives meaning to all masculinities. Feminist critiques of Lamar's work, such as Willis's article "To Pimp the Black Woman" on Kendrick Lamar's limited Black liberation, also discusses how Lamar offers limited political consciousness and that erroneously does not recognize or include women within his vision of liberation, and is therefore problematic and a point for further discussion. Yet, given some of Lamar's limitations, his work does open up some conversation to how political movements against police brutality are also part of the cultural discourse of hip-hop. In particular, the track "The Black Red Berry" from "To Pimp a Butterfly," Lamar described this as, this track has, "It's already in your blood because I'm Trayvon Martin, I'm all these kids. It's already implanted in your brain to come out your mouth as soon as you've seen it on TV. I had that track way before that, from the beginning to the end, and the incident just snapped it for me." For example, in the following lyrics from "The Black Red Berry," Lamar exclaims, "I want everything black, 6 in the morning, fire in the street, burn baby burn, that's all I want to see, and sometimes I get off watching you die in vain. It's just a shame that they call me crazy. They may say I suffer from schizophrenia or something." Here, Lamar reflects a desire to validate and empower his community through the lines "I want everything black." These lyrics assert a desire to embrace the color associated with race, with blackness that is devalued and racialized as a threat. And Lamar is also making a reference to the 1965 bus riots and the lyrics "Fire in the street, burn baby burns, all I want to see," in which the "burn baby burn" is a famous slogan that characterized the uprising in the African American community in Los Angeles. And by making this reference, Lamar's lyrics is a commentary that engages with the hegemonic political discourse that renders such bodies as illegitimate and unassimilable. So time's up, and yes, if you have any more questions, I do have some more to say, but we can talk about it in the questions. Thank you.